I think. Yes. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I wanted to expand more on like my thoughts with watching the Olympics, and like I've been watching the replays a lot, and honestly it's like really hard to do because like I don't enjoy watching it, to be quite honest. Like I don't enjoy watching horse sports in the way that I used to. Um and that kind of sucks, but it is what it is. So I wanted to talk about like what a better horse world might look like, and also just expand on what's been like what I've been seeing at the Olympics. And I haven't gone through like all of the riders' rides yet for like the event, even like and I'm catching up on the replays after everything's happened. I haven't been watching it live because of the time difference. Um, but like I've watched quite a few of the dressage rounds now, and I've taken some clips and some screenshots and stuff that I'll use later in a different video when I have more time to edit. But I'm honestly like largely just disappointed at like just like especially with the hyperflexion and like riding behind the vertical stuff, like it's just so prevalent at like in everything. And even the photos that I've been seeing news organizations post, like the FEI Chronicle of the Horse eventing, like US eventing, and just like all of the photos that I've seen posted for like advertising purposes for the Olympics, a lot of the ones taken in warm up, like that are taken from like an aerial view or like from above slightly, um like a lot of the horses are behind the vertical in it, like and it's so many photos at this point that I've seen more photos of horses being ridden behind the vertical than I have not. And the videos of them, like especially in the dressage ring, they also support that notion. So for me, I think what I find the hardest part is not even necessarily like the people that are putting in bad rides or riding around on distressed horses. It's like the general like apathy of the entire industry, and just how people are shrugging it off and being like, it's just a moment in time, it's no big deal. And it's like, how many times do we need to see these photos replicated before we realize it's not a moment in time? And like I'll humor people and go, even if it was a moment in time, why are we selecting such poor moments? Because if there's better moments to select from, which if these bad photos are actually representative of just like one bad moment, that means that should be tons of good moments to choose from. And yet news organizations and riders and just like everyone is like just selecting these bad moments. Like it's like the photo that I posted on my Facebook page of the rider with the Kinneton noseband, um, way too low on the horse's nose, sitting on the edge of the nasal bone. The FEI chose that photo out of all of the photos that they probably got from that day to share on their story. So even if we're gonna like give the moment in time argument merit and pretend that it's legitimate, which I personally do not think it is at all, then it's like, what has gone so wrong with our horse show organizations like the FEI and equestrian media, where they are so unaware of like what is and isn't a bad moment? Because with that in mind, like this is kind of my thought process on it. If they can't tell the difference between a good moment and a bad moment for what photos they select to advertise horse sport, um, how are they supposed to know what is and isn't a good moment as a whole across the board in competition if they're selecting all these bad moments? So even if we're going to pretend the moment in time argument is a thing, if the news organizations and the horse show organizations cannot tell the difference between good and bad, what's to say that they're doing anything to protect like horses from experiencing those bad moments? So like the apathy of the general public has been disappointing. Like sorry, not the general public, I should say horse people, because I'd say the general public is a lot more involved with like seeing horse sports for what they are. And to the person on Facebook who asked if it's one country that's guilty of riding that way, no, it's everybody. There was a couple of riders who I was actually quite pleasantly surprised by their tests. I need to write down the names or go back and look at them, but they're all European riders. What I noticed, like if we're going to talk about specific countries, is I noticed Team USA's eventing team seemed to have a big tendency to over tighten their nosebands and use really restrictive nosebands, and not a big fan of that. From what I saw of like Jessica Phoenix's photos, which I haven't gotten that far to watching her rounds yet, so take this with a grain of salt. She's on the Canadian event team. I was actually pleasantly surprised by the fact that she was just appeared to be riding in a snaffle and just a regular Cavesson noseband. Again, I need to actually watch closer, so that might not be the case. Maybe it's a gag and I just didn't notice, but from what I saw, it looked pretty benign compared to what a lot of people are using, and that was nice. Um, But across the board, there's just a lot of bad horsemanship that's being normalized, and like this is why people can't tell the good from the bad, because we have all these organizations that are supposed to be representing the top of the sport that are sharing bad photos that are showing horses being ridden in hyperflexion or in really restrictive equipment, and sharing them with like the with captions that are talking about the bond between horse and rider and how much horses love their jobs and like how spoiled these athletes are, and how like just really colorful, flowery language to just describe the horses when the photos aren't actually representative of that. So like horse people in the industry, it's like how are they supposed to learn what's good from bad if like these news organizations that they're trusting as an expert source for certain things aren't posting images that are actually reflective of what they're saying in the captions, and if like on an international level we're rewarding riders for doing things that are not okay. Because if you look at the FEI's rules for nosebands, it specifically states that if they're tightened to the point where it's like a welfare concern or painful or unfair to the horse, that it's considered like not okay and that stewards can step in and deal with it. And like with the amount of tight nosebands I saw at the Olympics, it's like, why isn't this being captured? Because if someone was able to capture that on footage, on video, and share it, like where are the even if they come in after the fact to look at it, where are the stewards? And like if they are witnessing that, why aren't they acting? Is someone preventing them from acting? Are there concerns and reports going not listened to? Like why isn't anything being done? Um, and that coupled with the apathy of the general public of horse people bothers me the most, because the FEI has rules in place that on paper look very good. Like if you go look at their welfare code of conduct, it's very reasonable. If they were actually upholding it and maintaining it in real life rather than just using it to virtue signal, it would be awesome. It would be way different in horse sports. But that's not what's happening. So I find myself feeling really frustrated because it's really hard to just see how many people are so tuned out of like how big of a problem this is. And the way I see it is like regardless of whether or not, like a lot of people in the competitive horse show industry would label me as an extremist. So let's just we'll humor them and call me that. Even if people view me as an extremist, like I think what people aren't understanding at this point, that there's a dire need to actually look like we care about horse welfare. There's a dire need to actually start addressing these problems and speaking out, and instead and doing things that aren't just related to like, oh, let's be positive and just ignore what's going on, don't post the negatives, hide this, hide that, that's just a moment in time, and like doing all these mental gymnastics to deflect from the actual problem. When we do that, the way it looks to the general public and people who have no stake in the game for ending horse sports or keeping them around, it looks really bad. It looks like we don't care. It looks like we're just indifferent to horses suffering, and that we're not even willing to reflect and consider whether or not what we're putting them through is fair. And it makes us all look bad. Like, regardless of whether or not people are guilty, you get roped in with the people who are guilty by having so many horse people take the path of apathy and go, like, oh, we need to be positive. This is like so much negativity. And it's trying to frame advocacy as just being negative, as if the intent is just to bully people and just be mean, um, rather than looking at it for what it is, which is like some people are mean about it, yes, but at its core, it's like a concern for the welfare of the horses, and labeling it all as negativity is downplaying the actual intent behind it and shrugging off the actual issues, because it's just making it out to be like people are blowing this out of proportion, where if anything, we are downplaying the amount of stress that horses are experiencing in competition. All of the trends that we have in studies on competition horses are showing us there's reason for more concern, not less. And for an industry full of people who care about horses, we really need to start looking at that unbiased information, because regardless of what anyone thinks about themselves, we do have bias. If you have done something your whole life and it's something you enjoy doing and you don't want to disrupt that, you're going to be less likely to want to look at it critically and consider whether or not things that you've normalized are okay or not. It's really hard to do. So in my opinion, the best way to avoid that bias is not looking to upper level professionals, not looking to horse trainers, but instead looking to like professionals in the equine sciences industry who are conducting studies, because there are more measures in place to eliminate bias. This isn't to say that studies cannot hold any bias, but they have to disclose conflicts of interest in the write up of the study. So if there is a conflict of interest where a brand has paid for the study to be done, for example, it has to be said in the study. Whereas a trainer who's saying things to just get more clients or to rush horses through the process of training to make more money, they don't have measures in place to eliminate bias. And a lot of times people are saying things that they believe to be true, that they've been told for years from when they started out riding, but that they don't actually know to be true, that aren't actually true, because there's a lot of misinformation that gets shared around. And then people just believe it. So we need to stop looking at people who are good riders, because being a rider who can win at the upper levels and being regarded as a good rider in terms of how you're able to put down a dressage test or jump a course, etc., or how quickly you're able to bring young horses up through the levels, all of those things, as long as our show industry is not putting welfare at the forefront of concerns, being able to do well in that atmosphere is not a measure of success when it comes to horse welfare. It's not. So we need to have these unbiased third parties come in and start to make decisions on behalf of the entirety of the horse world. People who aren't profiting off of the show industry, who aren't freaking riding in the shows that they're looking at, who aren't selling the tack and equipment that are involved with, like, for example, if like a bit dealer who's selling like gag bits were to get involved with like advocacy and making welfare change, there would be a bias involved where they probably wouldn't want to make illegal bits that they are selling. And it needs to be evidence informed, and like we have people around that are very capable of doing that. Like right away, ones that would come to mind immediately for me that would be great role models to use as advocates and like basically trailblazers for changing the show industry. I would say Dr. Sue Dyson and Dr. Paul McGreevy, because they put so much work into the equine sciences field for horse behavior and stress specifically, and have looked deeply into a lot of normalized training methods and beliefs in the horse world, and have done so with a critical eye. And it's not to say that they don't have their individual biases, but they have dedicated their time to truth seeking and research. And that is less than someone dedicating their time to moving up the levels, because if you've worked really hard to try to get to the Grand Prix level or to get to the Olympics or whatever, you don't want to derail that by changing the parameters that you have been working within. And like that's the truth. No matter how much a rider loves their horse and no matter how great they are, if they are motivated to be within the horse world, um like for show purposes, altering how the structure of horse showing works is going to be damaging to them, or at the very least, even if it's neutral, or even if it would benefit them, they are treading into unknown waters. They don't know what it's going to be like. So it's something that people are afraid of because they're worried about disrupting their place in the world. Like even with stuff like saying like, let's make it illegal to use flash nosebands and restrictive nosebands with gag bits. Something like that is going to cause huge uproar, because there's a ton of riders who use those exact combinations on their horses and who are fearful that they will not be able to perform at those levels without them. Because the fact of the matter is, if they had confidence in their ability to do what they do without those pieces of equipment, they wouldn't be so concerned about those changes happening, because they'd have faith in their ability to continue on regardless. And like that is like the tip of the iceberg in terms of improving horse welfare, because I personally think that should already be a rule. It's like pick one or the other. If you want to strap your horse's mouth shut, use a direct action bit. If you want to use a leverage bit, then don't use a flash. It's really that easy. But with that said, like there's a lot of bits that I don't even think need to exist. Like I would question whether or not leverage bits are ethical in general, especially when we're referencing English sports where you're riding two-handed with a direct contact, and where a lot of people are riding with converters or one rein on a gag bit. Like at the very least, it should be like, if you're going to ride in a leverage bit, you need to have a snaffle rein. No more converters once you're above a certain level of competition, because if you're riding at the Olympic level and you can't figure out how to ride in two reins, then maybe you don't need to be using that type of equipment. And like there's lots of little things that we could be looking at, but like the fact of the matter is, I think we need to be referencing evidence-based informed opinions from people who have less bias, because all upper level riders have bias. Everyone in the FEI has bias. All of the trainers of the upper levels have bias. All of the brands sponsoring them have bias. Everyone whose livelihood is directly linked to being at the upper levels of sport is going to be biased in favor of trying to keep things at least comfortably close to where they are, which is why we see so few upper level riders speaking out. Like, to be frank, like I can't even think of one upper level rider who's actually really blatantly made a point about the problems of hyperflexion in the Grand Prix dressage arena, for example, or the overuse of bits and gadgets in the show jumping ring. Can like anyone think of Grand Prix riders that have actually dedicated any real amount of time to calling out the status quo in the horse sport? And this is not a rhetorical question. I'm actually asking. Can anyone think of a single rider who is competing at that level that has actually dedicated a decent amount of time to talking about the issues at that level and calling out the sport at that level? Because I can't. And there is a reason for that. They are choosing to be silent because they don't want to alienate themselves from their peers. They don't want to risk getting judged differently, especially in disciplines like dressage where there's subjective judging. If you piss your judges off, or if you piss off people who are friends with your judges, it could impact your score. And otherwise, like even if it's not about scores, they're worried about how people are going to judge them, or they're worried about somehow getting caught in the crossfire of speaking out and having people who wish to silence you. So like it's no coincidence that there are so few upper level riders who are actually speaking out about these things. It's built into the framework of like our industry that they're going to be silent for that reason. So if we get third party organizations that are directly committed to studying horses from a scientific basis and truth seeking to be the primary like iron fist when it comes to like making regulations in horse sport, there's going to be more horse friendly practices. Even if they're not perfect, it's going to be more horse friendly than it currently is. But the problem with that is that, like, honestly, like, having looked at a lot of the studies, and this is where people are gonna get pissed off, but, like, most of the I can't really think of a single study that's been conducted on bits, for example, that has actually come about showing them in a favorable light where it's like, yeah, these are more ethical than bitless and there's no problems to consider with bits. All of the studies that have been done on bits, which is not very many, and like I'll get into that too, because I think that there's certain things that aren't getting a lot of funding for studies, because if they were to be funded and studied at length with huge sample sizes to the extent that they should be, it would be so damning to the horse sport as a whole that it would give evidence that would require a complete overhaul. Um, but like the studies that there are on bits are like pretty consistent in showing stress and like oral damage. And like, don't get me wrong, like there's a lot of nuance involved with that, because you have to look at the level of like the level of experience of the rider, the type of horse. Like, is the horse anxious during the test? Like, was the study conducted at their home base? um how well schooled is the horse? How handsy is the rider? And like there's a lot of stuff involved, so we'd have to do more studies to show, like, if you are working with your horses to try to eliminate stress and riding in a bit with very soft hands, does it have the same results? So more studies need to be done, but as it stands now, there is more evidence out there that would call to question the ethicality of bits than there are to basically promote the use of them. And the same goes for like a lot of training methods that we're seeing in competition. Like, we know transport stress for competition is really stressful for horses, and we know that like horses being hauled across the world to go to Paris and compete in the Olympics is a huge stressor, and people use that stressor to justify use of harsh equipment once they're there, or when the horses are looking and behaving stressed, and they use that to justify the necessary means to the end to control them, when really it should be used as an argument to question, if they are that stressed that they cannot be controlled without causing them pain, does that need to happen? Like, does that need to, like, should we reconsider how we structure horse sports if it's causing them that much stress and it's being used to justify equipment that's painful for them? And like, these are the questions that need to be answered, because honestly, as it stands now, it's so easy to just go silent and be like, let's just only share positivity. Horse sports are getting so much bad flack right now, let's only be positive, no more negatives. But that exact attitude is going to be what gets us canceled. It is, because people from the outside, welfare advocates and big organizations like PETA, who I really don't like, I think they are a sham organization, and I don't support the work that they do, because I think it's disingenuous, and a lot of their money just goes to propaganda and advertising, and a lot of their advertising is done in a way where it's not actually portraying things how they are. However, they are a very powerful organization, and if we continue to look really apathetic and indifferent, or even just like abuse apologists to the general public. We're playing right into their hands to get the sport canceled because we're giving everything that they need to be like, horse people suck. There's no ethical way to do any type of riding, and this is why horses shouldn't be used for sport ever, and this is why they shouldn't be ridden. Like that, like by being so bent on sweeping these problems under the rug and so fearful of them coming about that we go and double down and do the opposite and instead try to stick our heads in the sand and bury like what's been going on. It looks like we're protecting abusers because that's what it is. So we need to open discussion about these things, and we need to open them on big forums at an international level and be bringing to the table people like upper level riders to speak out on this and start to get them involved in the welfare movement. And like the last thing we should be doing is be going silent and engaging in toxic positivity where we're essentially pretending that there's no problem and instead being like, oh well, look on the bright side. Like I know horses are wildly stressed at shows and winning being ridden in hyperflexion. They're more likely to win behind the vertical in the dressage ring than they are on or ahead of the vertical, despite the rules saying that that's not correct. But I know that's a problem, but let's look on the bright side. Like, look at this upper level rider petting their horse after they fall off from a refusal, which, like, if you know what video I'm referencing, I'm not shaming the rider in that instance, but it's like, that's the bare minimum. Like it's playing into the way people think about people that for us to be surprised and be like, wow, that person didn't beat the shit out of their horse when they fell off. Good job. It's like that's the bare minimum. Being nice to your horse when they react due to nerves and they refuse a jump is the bare minimum. Like we shouldn't be applauding people for that. Withdrawing from competition when your horse is not at their best is the bare minimum. Like we're not even doing the bare minimum, or like when people do it, we're so pleasantly surprised that we act like it's like God's gift to humanity to do that. And it's literally something that should just be in place already. And the fact that it's that shocking to see that people feel the need to inflate it to being this amazing, like saint like thing is really quite scary. So like it's the bare minimum, but the toxic positivity is going to do us in. It's playing right into the type of behavior that like anyone who wants to take down the horse sport, what we need to be doing to help them do that is doing exactly what the industry has been doing, trying to cover things up, trying to downplay things, occasionally martyring people, which I would argue that they have decided to martyr Charlotte Dujardin, and she's gotten hit with penalties that are greater than what I think other people would have been hit with if this occurred at a different time. The fact that it's right before the Olympics and that there's been a lot of pressure building pertaining to improving horse welfare and sport did not go in her favor. And that's not me justifying her behavior. I just think that there's a lot of people who are speaking out against her and condemning her that are guilty of doing the same things. Isabel Worth is a great example. She condemned Charlotte's behavior. So did Carl Hester. And it's like, she's your friend, she's your peer. You're going to look me in the eye and tell me that you had no idea that there was even anything remotely sketchy going on. Especially like Isabel Worth is the worst one because it's like she's been caught doing roller and stuff. Like she's sketch, and she's trying to play the role of being like, wow, we need to improve horse welfare and like this is so terrible, we need like an overhaul. And she's throwing one of her peers under the bus, who arguably, like from what she showed in competition, from the videos that we've seen of her riding, used hyperflexion less than Isabel Worth did, or at least probably at similar levels, like, so she's thrown her under the bus to try to come out looking like a better person. And there's a bunch of people who are doing that, and it's effectively letting them off the hook at the expense of someone who's now getting far more hate than they would have, because now they have all these other big players in the horse sport that used to unconditionally support them for everything, throwing them under the bus to try to evade accountability themselves. And it's ridiculous. It's virtue signaling BS, and like I can't stand it because it's targeting one person and martyring one person is missing the entire issue, because the problem is that this is such an ingrained issue that it's just like so entrenched in the horse world, and there's way too many people guilty of it. It's not just a few bad apples. Like they're spoiling the whole barrel, and things that cause horses discomfort are being rewarded to such an extent that there's no incentive to not do it because you're winning. And like if that's how you make your livelihood and if that's how you build your reputation as a rider and trainer, it's like, why would you stop doing that if everyone around you is telling you that it's not an ethical problem and you're inclined to believe them because it's working for you? And it's like an echo chamber, because for me it took like stepping way far away from those environments to really reflect to the extent that I needed to, because you're just going to be enabled within those environments by people who are doing the same types of things. So it's really frustrating because like the toxic positivity and the ignoring the problem, ignoring the elephant in the room, and to focus on the bright side and to say nice things and never call out the bad things, that attitude has been used forever. There has not been a single time that anyone has ever criticized a top level rider where someone hasn't been like, that's negative, everyone makes mistakes, let's focus on the bright side and try to silence it. Like, we have maintained that attitude as an industry for so long and it hasn't worked. All it has caused is for people to get louder in their fight for welfare and get more overt with their attempts to change things and to get more direct. All it has done is radicalized a ton of people who are so frustrated with competition that when they would have started out speaking out on these things, they probably wanted to preserve competition, like a lot of horse people did. But now, seeing how far gone things are and how out to lunch people are about the damage that we're causing horses and how little people want to address it, people are getting radicalized to the point where they're like, throw the whole sport out. I don't care anymore. And like, honestly, I'm one of those people. I've stopped. I used to be really concerned about the sport being canceled and I would be more careful with stuff that I said out of fear of that. But like, I don't care anymore. If the sport has to go, the reason for that is going to be because of our stubborn refusal to change and to modernize. And if that is the hill that the horse world wants to die on, then the loss of the sport is deserved because it's just simply the consequence for our inaction when it comes to horse welfare. Because if we started to make changes and if we use these people in the equine science realm to study these things, we could actually give hard evidence that it has benefited horse welfare and show the world, look, like, here's the initiatives that we've taken to improve sport horse welfare, and here's proof that it's working. Here's the reduction of injury rates. Here's the reduction of stress behaviors. These things are working. And we could prove that to the world, but we need to actually make the changes first because right now it's flipped in terms of we have all this research showing that these things are causing horses stress and very little anything that supports the idea that it's healthy and safe and kind for horses. So like with that said, you could argue that there's need for more research. Not going to deny that. But if there's nothing on the other side that is showing that these are viable methods to continue using without concern, and there's enough evidence showing that there's need to reevaluate it, then it's like we should be reevaluating. And if we actually make changes, we can measure the data and prove to people that it's actually making a difference and be like, look, this has made a difference for horse welfare. And like what I would say to people is like honestly, I think that it goes way deeper and is way worse than what people are aware of. Like if anything, I think we are downplaying the state of the horse world when it comes to abuse and welfare issues because it's just so insidious and ingrained and like there's so many people who are committed to just looking the other way and being like, let's focus on the positive, don't be negative, don't call people out. That's bullying, that's mean. But then it's like okay to bully horses. Like that's the thing is it's like saying to someone like, hey, like that double twisted wire gag that you're yanking on your poor horse's mouth in is causing them pain and stress. And they're like, oh, you're bullying me. You're trying to cancel me. This is a witch hunt. But then it's like, who's protecting the horses? Do you not think that the horses feel bullied when we strap their mouths shut, like spank them with whips and like spur them on when they're afraid of something and use such harsh equipment that they can't really say no, that they're put in a position where they're between a rock and a hard place and they just have to do as they're told, or they're just going to get more and more uncomfortable and stressed for it. Like, do you not think horses feel bullied in that situation? Because I guarantee you they do. They feel like their lives are in danger. That's even worse than being bullied. People say really nasty things to me for the stuff that I put out there, and like it would be at least adjacent to bullying, but like I can close my computer, I can shut off my phone, they're not immediately in my house gagging me and carting me around and forcing me to do things against my will and controlling every aspect of my life where I have no choice. Like a lot of horses, people say that they live like royalty. If you actually want to break down how a lot of expensive competition horses live, it's closer to how prisoners live. A lot of them live in solitary confinement where they're staring at a wall all day, and the only real thing they can look forward to is getting to stretch their legs, but basically only within the context of being a puppet to the person on their back. And if they try to say no and if they freak out, they can get punished for it, or it's just going to be worse for them. So we say that a lot of horses live like royalty, and some of them are treated that way. I'm not saying that all upper level riders are guilty of this, but the way a lot of horses look, if you compare it to their species specific needs, it is more aligned with how prisoners are kept in Canada and the US specifically than it is with anything related to royalty. And even if it was like royalty, it's like they're horses. They don't want to live like royalty. And what I also want to point out with these like upper level horses is a lot of things that people attribute to them being treated like royalty are directly related to their owners doing things that are most beneficial to promoting their success in competition, like them getting massages, vet work, and having lots of money spent on their care, having their own personal groom, having a heavily bedded fancy stall. A lot of these things are within making the person who is using that horse feel the most comfortable and continue doing what they're doing. It's not actually about doing what's best for the horse, because if it was, the horses would go outside with friends and people wouldn't throw a conniption when they get a little scratch on their leg. Like, it's ridiculous to the point where like I was like looking at some of these Olympics photos, and there's someone who'd taken their horse for a walk to hand graze and put all 4 boots on his legs. It's like, damn, these horses literally cannot leave their stall and feel the air on their legs because their riders are so paranoid about them injuring themselves in their own free time, even when they're attached to a lead rope, that they are perpetually just like bubble wrapping them. But then they'll go and they'll jump that horse around on a 5-star cross country course over solid jumps that if the horse hits them with a leg, even with boots on, could do a lot of damage to them. So it's actually not rooted in trying to protect the horses from danger. It's rooted in trying to protect the horses from perceived danger that could render them unable to compete. It's not actually about protecting the horses for their best interest. And that's the part that pisses me off the most, is that it's talked about through this lens of them doing like what's right for their horses, and be like, oh well, like they don't like being turned out because they like pace and they run around a lot. And it's like, well shit, like I would too if you locked me in my room. And like, for reference, my bedroom for my size is like basically the size of like a large paddock for a horse. But if you locked me in here with no attention and nothing to do, and like no cell phone, no toys, and you just like threw me like a little bit of food 3 times a day, when you open that door, yeah, I'm gonna be freaking running out because I'm gonna be so stir crazy that I'm gonna want to like alleviate energy. And like, so a lot of these problems that people use to justify it, the equipment they use on horses and how they care for them, are caused by the people not providing the horses' needs. Horses who are kept in herds and actually properly socialized and actually having access to space are not going to lose their freaking minds when they suddenly have autonomous exercise. And they're also a lot less likely to injure themselves. Like, if you only let a horse go above the pace of a trot when they have a rider on them, yeah, when you set them free on their own and they've never learned how to navigate ground, when there's not someone piloting them around, they're going to do stupid things. And the amount of horses that get cast in stalls and get career-ending injuries or die or colic and die is so far above the amount that get injured in turnout, even if we're just looking at like injuries that are related to pulling them out of competition, not even stuff that kills them. Like, colic is the number 1 risk of mortality with horses, and it's directly linked to stalling. And yet this is still something that's heavily defended in the horse world and used to just like, people basically try to paint show horses as if they are like a different species than regular horses, which is not the case. They are still horses. Their behavior and their quirks are the result of their shared environment and the shared lack of access to necessary resources like turnout and socialization, and the general stress involved with those lifestyles. That's why we see so many similar qualities. It's because these horses are usually confined a lot, they're deprived of socialization, they have a lot of coercive training equipment used on them to control them when they're being like hot and like up, and they are perpetually being taken into very stressful environments without, in a lot of cases, having the stress actually dealt with and being taught like emotional regulation skills. So then you have where they're going to be behaving more explosively, and people are using that to attribute to like, this is what high-end sport horses are like, and this is just the way that they are, when it's largely actually influenced by the care of them. And this isn't to say that like certain breeds aren't bred to be like more high strung, because like, yes, like thoroughbreds, warm bloods, and Arabians are bred to do really like fast twitch muscly type sports where they're doing go 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 go, and they have to be like on it, and they have to be more up than, let's say, like a draft horse who's bred to pull. um And like of course there's nuance even amongst breeds, but generally speaking, if you get like a thoroughbred and you get like a young draft horse of the same age, the draft horse in a lot of cases, especially if they've been raised the same way, is probably going to be quieter than the thoroughbred overall. But with that said, horses are largely the product of their environment. Like a lot of the things that people like to attribute to breed, like gender, coat color, or like the status of the horse, whether or not they're a top level competition horse, a lot of those things are actually influenced by how they're cared for. And it's really it's a cop out, and it's like excuse seeking for people to try to say that, like to try to just blame it on the horse and be like, oh, it's just like a high level competition horse, like they love their jobs, they love to win. And it's like they can't understand the concept of winning. They can't, because not only would they have to be able to conceptualize the idea that they are competing against other horses for the purpose of winning something, and understand the framework of what they are doing in an intimate way, to the extent that, like, if you go and bring any random human who knows nothing about horses and sit them down to watch horse competition and ask what is being judged and what the purpose is, even that person is going to struggle to understand it. But then we have horse people who will look you in the eyes and tell you that a horse has the capacity to do that, even when people struggle to get it, when we can communicate those things to get to each other, and when they have the capacity to understand what competition is in the first place. Just by sitting down and seeing it, they know it's a competition. Um, Horses can't conceptualize that. They don't know they're winning. They don't know why they're being taken to these places. So at the very least, if we're going to do that, we need to do it in a way where they're not fretting for their lives the entire time, and not having their lives disrupted to the point where they have very little autonomy and freedom for the vast majority of their lives. And it's really very sad, because a lot of the problems that people run into with competition horses are directly influenced by how they are cared for. Like even like rider injuries, like where people have these really bad falls where they get super injured, the horse gets super injured, or one or both of them die. This isn't to say they can be completely avoided, and this also isn't giving blame to the riders, but there are factors that influence those types of things that make it more likely to happen. And like a good example of that would be is if your horse is chronically stressed and you're maintaining control of it through really coercive and painful equipment, if it's in fight or flight mode and it's actively in survival mode, they're not going to be thinking as like freely and uninterrupted as a horse who's relaxed and calm and focused. They're going to be stressed because their stress hormones are going to be overriding their brain's capacity to think and learn in the way that they might need to. When you couple that with like improperly fitted equipment, like an over tightened flash noseband that's impacting their ability to breathe, then you have a horse who's doing highly physical exercise that isn't getting enough oxygen. And like, I don't know if anyone has ever been sick before, where you have had a cold or like, let's say pneumonia, and you're healing and you're feeling better, but you try to go for a walk or something and you get winded way quicker. Like, imagine how hard it would be when you're feeling like that to go and jump like a course of jumps, and just have someone continue to like spur you on and force you to do it even as you're gasping for air and unable to breathe. Do you think it would impact your ability to perform that sport well? The answer is yes. And then when you go into like general discomfort or like saddle fit or like underlying pain, or like horseshoes is another great example, because again, I've seen a lot of photos and like from the videos for the dressage, for the event horses at the Olympics, you can see their hooves, and so many of those horses have contracted heels and they're in caudal failure. So we have horses who have hooves that are not functioning to absorb shock and work in the superior manner that they are meant to. Like hooves are amazing. They are such a complex and cool structure. They're so cool. Um, but with how we have managed them, we've created a lot of our own problems. Like a lot of horses who are lame when you take shoes off are lame because of how the shoes have impacted the overall structure of their hoof and how they've been trimmed to be able to wear those shoes. And now this isn't all types of shoes, but I'm referencing like open heeled steel horseshoes, which is what the vast majority of horses are wearing. If you go and look at the underside of their feet at competitions, which if you go and look at the replays, you can see what I mean. Go look at the dressage clips, because there's parts where they zoom in on the hooves at the end of every test to do like this cool artistic slow-mo video. And so many of those horses have really atrophied frogs, and their heels are like collapsed, and like their heels look like butt cheeks, because they are in caudal failure. And that's yet another example of how we are impeding their ability to be able to keep themselves safe. Because if they can't even feel their feet, or if it hurts every time their feet are hitting the ground, it's going to be really difficult for them to perform to the extent that they could if they have if they have good proprioception and they're able to feel the ground and like understand the like and feel where they are in the environment, because that's what the hoof does. If you watch horses out in the field who are barefoot or who are shod a little bit differently and their hooves are functioning more normally, you can literally watch them before their foot hits the ground anticipate like a dip and change in the footing and adjust accordingly. And that's why they're able to cover so much ground so quickly without injuring themselves if you let them. And yes, sometimes they do still injure themselves. They're not like the best made animals overall, but if you watch how they are able to gauge the ground and interact with the environment barefoot versus with like shoes that are causing them to be in caudal failure, huge difference. I will never again ever shoe my horses with metal open-heeled horseshoes because I think I would have a panic attack watching them run across the grass with horseshoes on. Because they would just go, they're like on ice skates. They go sliding around. It's like an octopus on ice skates, and they don't have the same ability to know when to stop. Like my horses can run full speed straight at a fence, and they'll slide on the brakes at the last minute, and they just do. They know that they'll be able to stop in time before they hit the fence. When it's really wet and there's dips in the ground where the ground is more mushy, you can watch them change their pace before ever even hitting that spot to cross it more safely. In the winter time, when there's areas of the ground that are more slick than others, they know how to adjust to get around it. Not that I leave my horses on an ice field. I'm even just referencing snow. That's another thing, is snow doesn't pack in the hooves as much for horses that are barefoot. They are able to release the packed snow and not be standing on little stilettos from the snow. And then that takes away yet another excuse that's often used to deprive them of turnout, because a lot of people will be like, oh, they can't go out in the snow, their hooves will pack. And if you live somewhere where it snows, that's a pretty freaking big problem. So there's all of these things that are directly contributed to by our decisions, and there's a ton of research showing us where we can make better decisions for horses, and we just aren't as an industry. And in the face of like growing pressure and criticism about the horse sport and the ethicality of it, so many people are choosing to just look the other way and be like, I don't want to be negative. I'm just going to be positive. And it's like, well, in order to actually address problems, you need to be what they're calling negative by like looking the problem for what like in the face and going, we need to talk about this in order to discuss solutions. We can't address problems if we're not acknowledging that they're there in the first place. So the whole commitment to positivity to the point where we're actually just going to ignore the elephant in the room, it's like giving the same energy as like just pretending that someone's not being a shitty person to your friend, even though you're hearing them berate your friend and just be abusive to them, and seeing it happen and you're just going, oh well, like not my circus, not my monkeys, and you just let it happen. It just perpetuates the problem and it continues to grow. It's not addressing it. And one thing I can also promise you is that like welfare advocates are not going to shut up. The more apathetic the horse sport stays, the louder they are going to get, the more bold of action they are going to take, and it's going to get much, much worse. That's not a threat. It's kind of a promise. I'm not saying I'm going to be the one to do it, but when people are trying to push for systemic change and they are perpetually ignored and silenced, they get louder. And you're going to see that happening if we don't actually start to look like we care and make big changes. Um, and honestly, like a lot of people are like the FEI and organizations like that are like hand feeding some people like little sugar cube tidbits of virtue signaling, like their welfare code of conduct, for example, or like discussing changes that they're going to make in the sport, which they've done when they condemned hyperflexion years ago, mind you. But until they actually put action behind their words, we are fools for just like eating out of their hands and being like, this is so great. Like they care about horses. It's like, put your money where your mouth is and prove it first, especially with the amount of years that they've gone completely unchecked with powerful people. Like actually show us change before we buy into it. And yes, and like yeah, someone's saying something about Dressage Hub with her being targeted for exposing people. Yeah, like people are really not nice to her, and she get like I'm not saying like I don't agree with everything anyone does, but like she's clearly very passionate about making changes in the horse world, and people throw her under the bus for really stupid stuff. Like, I saw people claiming that she was the one that leaked the Charlotte Dujardin video simply because they don't like her. And they just like pulled that tidbit out of their ass and were just like starting to spread it like wildfire and inciting hate for something that she did not do and that they have no proof that she did. Um, and like that's the thing is people are like really quick to attack welfare advocates and point out every problem with them, but then the same problems and worse in their favorite upper level riders are ignored. You have to be like essentially the perfect advocate in every sense of the way, which honestly to them the perfect advocate is someone who just shuts up and doesn't say anything or doesn't say it anywhere where they can see it. That's the perfect advocate in these people's minds. But people are constantly tone policing people who are speaking out. Like the amount of people who I've had say, why don't you just stop yapping and actually go do something? And it's like, well, damn, in the last year, I've co founded a welfare organization that has actually sat down with the FEI representatives and talked about policy change. So, like, what else do you want me to do? And, like, they're not engaging in advocacy themselves. They're not setting an example. They're just criticizing and tone policing everyone who's actually putting themselves out there and putting their reputation and their mental health on the line in order to do so. But they're hypercritical of like the tone. It's like, oh, you shouldn't be that critical. Oh, well, like you shouldn't share photos like that. Or, oh, well, like you need to actually put action behind it because words aren't enough. But then if you look at historically for systemic changes across the world, what has brought them? People getting loud and talking and growing the community of people who are concerned about the issues. That is how systemic change happens. Like the amount of women that are in the horse sport that have told me that talking doesn't do anything. It's like, dang, Brenda, you have the right to vote because of women who wouldn't shut up like 100 years ago. They gave you rights that you now have because they wouldn't shut up. And now you're telling women who are doing similar things in different industries to shut up and that it doesn't do anything. But it's like you would not have had a voice if people hadn't shut up. And it's the same thing with like even having a bank account. Women didn't have access to bank accounts until like I think the 60s or something. It was way more close in history than you would think it was. And systemic change like that has been brought about by people looking at these problems and getting loud about them and not shutting up and just throwing a big enough stink that people in power finally make the decision to make adjustments. And that is how change has been brought about in basically every way. And it's just so frustrating to have people be so fixated on perfection when it comes to people's advocacy, but then they don't hold upper level riders who are actually causing horses harm to the same accountability, where it's like, okay, where's the perfection you're expecting from them? With them, it's like, oh, their horse's mouth is bleeding. Well, everyone makes mistakes. The horse probably just bit its tongue. Meanwhile, like I can post a post where someone misinterprets what I'm saying and they're like, wow, that was really mean. Like you should delete this and issue like a mass apology, and like you're bullying like Charlotte Dujardin and causing a witch hunt because I said that like her suspension was deserved. um and that's a problem. But then they're like, oh well, everyone makes mistakes. Like hitting a horse 24 times, everyone makes mistakes. That's fine. We shouldn't be, that shouldn't change how you perceive this person. But on the flip side, the degree of accountability they hold everyone else to is like absolutely freaking ridiculous. And also something that I firmly believe too is that if we took a video of a no-name rider doing all of the same things that these upper level riders have been exposed doing, and they're just like a backyard trainer who's like a nobody in the horse world and hasn't developed the same cult like following that a lot of upper level riders have. If we took a nobody and videoed them doing the same thing, watch how quickly they would get thrown under the bus in comparison. People would not be putting their necks on the line to defend someone that they don't have that relationship with and who doesn't hold the same status. A lot of it is status driven, it's elitism, and that's also why a lot of people in defending their upper level idols will go, oh, you're just like a backyard rider. All you do is trail ride. I had someone say that to me today. I'm like, okay, and you're trying to make fun of me for like enjoying my horses without having any incentive to win a ribbon. Like, what's wrong with that? Like, oh, you're making fun of me for just enjoying being with my horses. I've had people be like, oh, like you just have a bunch of pasture puffs. And that's like, okay, like you're talking about me keeping my horses in a herd in the field together and them just living their best lives like it's a bad thing to be ashamed of. Like what? Or like you're just jealous. You haven't competed at that level, and it's like, okay, like, and not everyone wants to show, not everyone wants to compete, not everyone feels the need to do that, or even people who want to. Not everyone can afford to get there. It's largely, and this is not to offend anyone, but it's largely a rich people's club. The people who are poor that actually make it to the top of the sport are few and far between for a reason, because money is very helpful in helping you climb the levels of horse sport. So it's a rich people's club too, and there's a lot of elitism and like prejudice that's directed at people that they view as like peasants in comparison to who they are. And they find it really easy to write off the opinions of those people simply because they're not part of their big rich people's club. And even the people who worked their way up from the bottom, who actually were poor and couldn't afford things and had to do all the grunt labor and stuff to get there. And I'm not discounting the work that they put in. It's like good for them. But a lot of times, in order to get noticed and get to the top, you have to kiss a lot of ass to the point where you become one of them, even if you were not initially rich in getting there, because you have to immerse yourself in their culture and suck up to everyone in order to have them be willing to give you opportunities. And you have to be willing to deal with certain behaviors in order to get opportunities. And this is without even going into how much people are exploited in working student positions and how often people who are privileged are taking advantage of poor people on the basis of giving them an opportunity to get to the top, and doing so by not paying someone for really heavy labor. And like this isn't to say I'm against like giving people lessons or leases or whatever in exchange for labor, but like what they are getting in return, if you put what that service is worth, just the cost of it, their work hours, even at minimum wage, oftentimes are far more than what they are getting. Um, and it's not a fair trade-off. But like it's very normalized to work people in really unethical ways. Like I have seen a lot of barns advertise work positions where they are not even offering minimum wage, just like shamelessly posting it. And fortunately, people are getting louder mouths with calling those types of things out and being like, that is insane, which is good. But it's something that happens. And like just this notion that you should have to provide free grunt work labor with generally doing things that are dangerous and impactful to your overall physical health in order to get the chance to compete at the upper levels is really quite flawed. And it's just yet another means of taking advantage of people who don't have as much. And this isn't to say that everyone who offers working student positions does it, but it's a big enough problem, and it's like a very well known across the board phenomenon in the horse world that everyone is just like, yeah, whatever, like uh if you work hard enough you'll get there, is like one of the favorite things for people to say. And generally it's people who come from privilege, and it's like, well dang, like Susan, like yeah, like my version of hard work is having to work to be able to afford to pay my university tuition and my horses and my lessons. Meanwhile, like your parents are paying your rent, your car, and you got your horses bought for you and you get your show fees paid for. So, like, yes, you work hard in your lessons to get there, but there's a whole lot of expenses that you don't have to worry about putting the work hours in to fulfill. Um, so like people have different versions of what is and isn't hard work. And a lot of the people saying that if you just work hard enough, you can make it happen, are coming from a background where they have things that are getting paid for by their parents or other people in their life, or like trust funds, etc., that they don't even consider how hard their life would be if suddenly they did not have that. And I say this as someone who used to be one of those people, because my family was pretty well off when I was growing up as a kid, which is why I showed as much as I did as a child and why I had access to the things that I did. And it quite literally made my career now, because if I hadn't learned to ride as well as I did back then, there is no way anyone would have given me the free opportunities to learn under them and to ride their horses that I received. If I didn't have all those lessons as a kid. And I lost like access to being able to do that pretty young. It was around like 10 or 11, where I had to start working to like at the barns to try to work off board and stuff. Um, and things got a lot harder, and then I started showing an awful lot less, like especially after like age 13. But I know what it is like to have those things paid for. And I've also had a lot of friends who, because I grew up in a relatively affluent area, so even when I stopped being wealthy, we remained there because that's where all my friends and school was. So I had friends who were really nice people, but like they truly couldn't comprehend the fact that like if they get a car purchased for them for their first car and they have their insurance and their gas paid for, that they are having a huge burden taken off of their shoulders to pay for. And like the same applies to horse people. If you don't have to worry about paying for your university tuition or going into debt to do it, or paying your plane tickets to fly across the country to go show, or paying your show fees, or even if you do pay your show fees, if you don't have to worry about paying rent or like insurance or for your horse's board or for your lessons. These are all things that if you don't have to worry about that, it gives you more access. And our industry is notoriously terrible at acknowledging that. And yet they gaslight people into thinking that if you don't get opportunities, it's because you don't work hard enough. So at all levels, like our sport is pretty corrupt and like out to lunch about the problems in the world. And there's a huge element of privilege that is driving a lot of people's perspectives. Because I've noticed that most of the people that I interact with that are in the welfare sphere and wanting to promote change are people who are generally like, even if they still have financial privilege, they're not coming from the same backgrounds as a lot of people at the top. Um, and I think that like being in that position where you're not just having things given to you in the same way and having the ease of moving up the levels and being in like what I call the rich people's club, if it's not the same way, like it gives them more perspective and it makes it easier to transition over to considering different perspectives and not doubling down on doing things that the way that they've always been done. But the fact of the matter is, like, I think that the worst thing we can do for the horse sport is not acknowledging the elephant in the room and not addressing the problems. Like going into this apathetic state and just maintaining that and doubling down and defending everything and not making any moves for change is just proving all of these welfare people right when they think that horse people don't care about their horses and they just view them as sporting equipment. And like I don't believe that. Like I think a lot of riders have been taught that what they're doing is okay and that it's harmless to the horse, and there's like a huge element of cognitive dissonance because they don't want to admit the harm that they've caused because it's very painful to do so. So I think a lot of these riders, even ones that are guilty of abuse, actually do love their horses. Like I don't think Charlotte Dujardin didn't love Blueberry and like the other horses that she's worked with. Like I'm sure she actually does in a way love the horses, but like they're trained to view certain things as acceptable and it's so normalized that they don't see a problem with it. And even when it's brought to their attention that it's not acceptable, they have a hard time taking that in and actually sitting with it because it's so uncomfortable to do, and really putting the work in to actually change that mindset and really take a hard look at the way things are done means like completely alienating yourself from your peers and forever seeing the horse world in a different way, and a lot of people don't want to do that. So instead, they just double down and they defend what they're doing, and their brain protects them by going into a cognitive dissonance that just seeks for confirmation bias and just ways to maintain the life that they already have and discredit anyone who calls to question that. And that's also why we're seeing people get so mad and resort to insults, and why people will dedicate so much time to like engaging on advocacy posts to argue their point and just are like vitriolic about it. It's because they see themselves in the people that are being criticized, and they are defending themselves through that person as a vessel. If they defend their upper level idols behavior, they also are defending their perspectives on the horse world. And I say this as someone who used to do the same thing. It is more comfortable to double down and justify the way that you have always done things than it is to sit and go, wow, for like a decade plus, I abused horses and I was really cruel to them, and have to sit with that and think about all the horses who you loved deeply that and the things that you've done to them when you start to realize how bad they are, and just go, wow, that's what I did. And the longer you wait to do that, the harder it is. Like if you're like in your 50s or 60s and you've done things your whole life that way, looking back on the entirety of your riding career through that lens means having some of your most cherished moments tarnished. And that is really hard to do. And it sucks because there's a lot of stuff that I was so proud of that I held so dear to my heart, and like things have shifted to the point where it's not the flex that I thought it was. Like for me now, I'm not going to go like, oh, like here's my like the wins that I had on the show circuit, and like this is how fast I brought along this training horse, and like here's how good my seat was riding through all these antics of these panic stricken horses. Those aren't the things that I'm going to flex anymore because I don't view things through the same lens. Now it's going to be like, wow, I developed a friendship with my Mustangs by gentling them at liberty, and they like people, and I didn't have to traumatize them to do it. And it's possible to do that. That's something that I'm really proud of, and it changed my perspective on horses a lot. Um, it's not going to be the same. Like, I don't view things through the same lens. So a lot of things that I was super proud of, and like even pictures that you used to love, like there's so many photos that I was so proud of back in the day that I now look back on and I'm like, holy crap, I cannot believe I shared that everywhere and was so proud of it. So it's easier for these people to defend their behavior than it is for them to sit with like the actual gravity of it and how it impacted the horses that they've harmed. And like it's really easy for people who are against that now to vilify these people and go like they're just terrible, bad, irredeemable people, let's throw them out forever. Because like we still live in a very punitive society where like that's the way we view like people who do bad things, is just to punish them. But punishment culture, like even with people, doesn't really work. Like I think holding people accountable is important, and I don't think like it probably feels punishing to the person to be plainly told that what they're like, that you don't support what they're doing. It sucks. um Even if it's coming from someone who loves and respects you, it's not comfortable to do. But like I think that viewing it through the lens of like all of these people are completely unsalvageable is missing the point, because we need them to be salvageable in order to actually change the horse world. We need to operate with the belief that people can make changes, and that it's possible for someone to have done really unkind things to horses for years because that's what they've been taught to do, and still grow and change from it. Like there's a lot of stuff that I'm really ashamed of that I did growing up and that I learned to do. And like even starting out my professional training career, there's stuff that I did that was for sure not ethical, and it's not something I would condone now. And honestly, it's largely why I've taken such a big step back from taking on clients and training and riding professionally to the extent that I was, because there was just a lot of burnout. And when you're trying to pay your bills solely off of that, and your clients want specific outcomes, especially if they're going to just drop you as a trainer and go train with someone else, there's situations where you feel pressured to do things that you know aren't the best decision. And like I got so burnt out and I got so fatigued from doing that because I was starting to see things for what they were, and I couldn't operate with like the level of blissful ignorance that I had in the past, and it took a huge toll on my mental health, and it was frying my brain and my patience to the point where I was becoming like the worst, like a not the worst version of myself, because I'd say that was when I was younger, like in my teens and earlier, but like a bad version of myself where it was impacting my ability to be a good trainer and to be empathetic and patient with the horses. And it was also like it also put me in a position where it's like, okay, I can either get paid and have this person as a client or sell out on my morals. Which is it going to be? And it hit a point where I just had to get comfortable with people not liking me, with clients shit talking me when I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And just knowing how it was going to change. And then from there, it was like, okay, as soon as my business with products and doing like Patreon stuff came viable enough that I didn't have to completely rely on training for an income, I took a huge step back because I was so burnt out. And I was like, I'm freaking tired. I don't even get to enjoy my own horses. I'm miserable. I'm working so hard to pay for my bills and take care of my own horses, but I basically only hang out with them when I'm taking care of them. And I'm miserable and this sucks. And then it sucks because it's like all the time you're spending is with other people's horses, and oftentimes it's in situations where you're not actually doing what you want, and where you feel pressured to do certain things based off of what the owner's expectations are for the horse. Even if those things aren't necessarily bad, it could just be boring, where it's like, okay, this person wants to do tons of arena work with their horses and doesn't believe in groundwork, and it's like, well, I think it would be more beneficial to approach this from the ground, but they're disagreeing with me and they don't want to pay for groundwork sessions, so I just have to do this to get paid. And so like being able to take that step back and take a break has further changed my perspective from how it was like even 2, 3, 4 years ago, because I removed myself from an environment that was toxic. And this isn't to like speak ill of my clients, because it most of them were wonderful. um And a lot of it was like an internal battle within myself that they're not even necessarily aware of, where I was like, I don't really want to do mostly pressure and release based training anymore. Like, I want to have clients who are okay with me using food in training, and a lot of people still weren't. And then it was like an internal struggle with that, where it's like, I'm not actually doing what I want to do. And I'm losing autonomy and my sense of personhood by doing this. So then I took a big step back when it was viable. And like, that's something that people will notice too. And I'm sure people in this movement, um, who hate my posts would use that to discredit me. They'd be like, "Oh, well, Shelby has like no clients anymore. She's not a real trainer." But like, it was a necessary step for my mental health. I was like, I am going to literally have a mentee be if this continues. Like, I almost did. There was times where I was like literally screaming into a pillow and like didn't want to wake up to go to work the next morning, was dreading working with horses, and I was like, I'm supposed to like this. And then I started worrying, and I was like, am I just gonna stop wanting to like work with horses at all because I'm so miserable right now? And I was like, I'm losing my love for this, and it just feels like a chore, and I'd rather just like sit inside and just lay in my bed and nap. And I was like having like 3 naps a day at one point because I was so exhausted, and it was just awful. So for myself, I took that big step back, and it's like, eventually I want to get back into it through the context of mostly prioritizing clinics and like very select clients, because at least with the clinic, even if someone thinks you're full of shit, like they enter the clinic knowing that they're only training with you for like a day or a weekend, and there's not this expectation of like certain results within the span of like a month, for example, where when they have a horse in full training, they like people have certain expectations, or you have to find very specific clients that are willing to like adjust their perspectives accordingly depending on what the horse needs at any given time. So I want to do more clinics and stuff, but it's like I've been recovering from like a multi-year burnout, honestly, for like a long time. It's just been like the last couple of years where things have quieted down enough where I can really take like a big breather. And even then, there's still stressors involved and stuff that make it hard to do. Um, but basically, what I'm saying is that there's like a lot of stuff that I used to do that I now condemn and criticize. So it's like I was able to change. I believe in other people's ability to change and see that what they're doing is wrong and make better decisions as soon as they recognize it as a wrong. And I know the process of doing so is not easy, because when you're in a cognitive dissonance that is upheld by all of your peers, your trainers, and the people who you've grown closest to in the horse world, it sucks, because reflecting on that, especially if you become openly like public about how you're feeling and your thoughts on the horse world, and it's not in alignment with the people that you've become closest with in the horse world, you're going to lose friends. There's no way around it. Some people cannot handle you looking at stuff more critically. I've had people in my local community get mad at me for talking about my own horses and problems that I had with them and mistakes that I made, because they are have recently or are currently making mistakes that I'm now talking shit about myself, though. And then hearing me say that makes them uncomfortable. So you lose friends, and you lose, like, it can also taint like how you view your role models, and it might result in you being like, I need to train with someone else now, and it sucks. It uproots your life, and it's just like not fun. So like I totally understand why people want to double down and not do those things, but like what I would like to share with people who are kind of on the fence about it is like, even when I was at my most defensive of stuff that I now do not approve of when it comes to training horses, there was like an internal knowing where part of the reason why I got so frustrated and angry with horses was because I didn't feel good about what I was doing. And there was just this internal part of me where I just felt off and wrong. And it was contributing to my overall lack of patience and frustration, because I wasn't happy doing what I was doing, and it didn't feel right. And it also, like, I didn't understand why horses were behaving the way that they were as well as I do now, because I would view it through the lens of, oh, this horse is being bad. They're doing this to defy me. This is an act of defiance, and they're just trying to walk all over me. And now, like, that I can look at it and go, this is a horse who's overwhelmed, or this could be a pain response. There's some parts that are harder where it's like, okay, if my horse is having a bad day and it's like, or like bad days that are consistently happening where I'm running into the same problems, then I start to spiral about like what physical problem they could have. And sometimes you can't find a clear cause when you're doing like vet stuff. And that can be really frustrating. But at the very least, it's like I feel more in control in terms of like understanding what to do next, and also just like having more faith in myself, where it's like, okay, if I need to give my horse a year off to rest an injury, I can do that without it completely ruining my life. Whereas back in the past, when I was prioritizing showing and riding a lot, like that would have been the end of the world to me. So it's been freeing to kind of get to the point where it's like it's not as important to me to maintain certain things. Like I don't need to ride all the time. I don't ride that often right now. Like I spend a lot of time just hanging out with my horses on the ground and doing chill things on the ground, and I really like doing that. And I didn't think in the past that I did, because I was taught that that stuff was stupid, and I was trying to like prove myself as an equestrian and do what I thought needed to be done and what I'd been taught to do for so many years and didn't bat an eye at until I started getting exposed to new ways of thinking. Um, but, like, the process is hard, and, like, what I also wanna reiterate to people is, like, when someone decides, like, that they're like, "I wanna start clicker training, and I wanna start, like, handling my horses differently." You don't just, like, snap your fingers and then go directly over to that side of things without having any mistakes. Like, you're going to regress to behavior patterns that you have engaged in for years and have been taught that are okay to do, and you're going to have lapses in judgment where you make mistakes and you resort to your old behaviors because they've become habitual. And the key with it is starting to notice when you're getting more frustrated and more likely to make those mistakes and cutting it off sooner, or taking a break sooner, or putting your horse back, or changing what you're doing, taking it, going for a walk, doing something to bring your emotional state down so that you don't react in a way that isn't in alignment with the rider that you want to become. Um, and it's about catching yourself sooner and doing things a little bit differently and just having the patience to like believe that it's going to work too, because that's the other thing too, is when you haven't done certain training methodologies and you're not sure of the success of them, it can be really hard to just commit to doing things and not know the outcome. And like honestly, even a recent example is like with Mesa, for like the full first year that I was gentling her, she would let me touch her, but she never liked it. She never liked it. She'd always turn her head away, and she'd tolerate it, but she hated it. And I started to question, is like, is this horse ever actually gonna like me? Like I was like, I feel like this is going nowhere, and I couldn't see where the future was gonna pan out to, and the horse that she was gonna become. So I'd look at that at face value, and I felt like a failure in those moments. But I still continued doing what I was doing. So I was like, I believe it that this is the best way of doing this. Like forcing her to be around me is not going to work. This is the way I should do this. And then she ended up coming around, and like there's been a lot of situations like that where I found myself in like a training pickle where a horse is behaving in a way that I'm like, wow, this is like dangerous, or this is going to be a whole lot to fix, and I'm starting to lose hope and it's not feeling good. But then they turn a corner and you realize that it's working. And when you start to do things differently, you need to build that confidence by trusting the process, asking for help from role models you trust who are knowledgeable on like what you're trying to do, and just committing to the process and realizing that it's not necessarily going to be instantaneous, and just seeing how it works. Because then the more successes you get, the more you realize like, hey, like this actually does work, and like this is not so bad. Like we're turning a corner in training. And sometimes it happens like that, where it's like all at once, where suddenly one day the horse is being completely different. Um but in making those changes, you also have to understand that like, yeah, you're going to go back to old habits sometimes. Like no one that's like a crossover trainer where they've gone from doing things very traditionally to doing like clicker training and positive reinforcement stuff. um no one who's done that has just made the switch without ever deviating to ways that they used to do things. It's not realistic. It's kind of the same thing as like if you're trying to untrain a behavior that a horse has learned is successful for achieving something. Uh, it's going to take time. You can't just have one repetition of showing them the right way to do something and undo that behavioral pattern entirely. It takes time and patience and repetition, and just like noticing your triggers and catching them sooner and adjusting accordingly. Um, and I think that aspect of the conversation with like welfare reform is often lost because it's really wordy and it's hard to make that point to people and have them listen, especially when they get triggered by what is being talked about as a welfare issue and go into like denial and defensiveness. They don't generally stick around to actually hear that it's like, hey, like, yeah, like we've all, or most of us have been there before. And like, I know how you're feeling and I get it, but like, telling you that what you're doing is not damaging to the horse is not going to help you in the long run. Um, And like I had people who were pretty hard on me. Like there's some people who were nasty to me to the point where it for sure wasn't helpful, where they would just send really, really mean things that had like not even a stitch of like educational stuff in it where they're actually giving advice. But there's some people that would give advice that I would get mad at, but like they were right. I just wasn't ready to hear it. And also hearing it publicly when you're like a public figure on like social media, and having that like to deal with that in your comment section is like a knock to confidence that can make you more likely to be defensive. um, and also you don't have tone, so you don't really know what someone's intentions are, and when you're privy to a lot of hate and judgment, you're more likely to view people's comments through that lens. But basically what I'm trying to say is that you have to put work into like undo patterns of behavior that you've learned. It's not going to be instantaneous, and like having done bad things in the past does not mean that that has to be your future, or your present. Like you can start to make different changes, and it starts with just making little minor adjustments and just like reflecting on things that you're doing and like questioning things, asking questions, looking into modern research, and not just blindly following what you're told to do from your instructor. If you're with a trainer who makes you feel bad for asking them questions and questioning what they say, um, that's a bit of a red flag, because they should be able to explain their process to you and not feel threatened by you asking for more clarity, or for you looking at other sources and just like doing your own learning outside of that. If they feel attacked by you reading books on horse behavior or looking into studies and questioning certain methods, then it's like they're not very confident in what they're doing then. Um, and that's a bit of a red flag. Like they should be okay with students taking the initiative to do further learning on their own and questioning things. Like being a critical thinker who doesn't just freely accept what you're told blindly is a good thing. And like this isn't going to go in my favor always when I tell people to do this, because they could go, um, they could call me out on shit that might suck for me, but it's like, no, you shouldn't even take what I say blindly. Like look stuff up and question things and be curious, because that's going to lead you to more information. um, and it's like a good thing, and I would just caution people when you're doing that to like take note of like whether or not you're only looking for information that supports the perspective that you want to believe. Because when I was initially starting out, that's what I did, is I would look for studies that supported what I wanted to do and supported the direction that I wanted to continue going with like horse training and whatnot, and wasn't as receptive to studies that said the opposite. So take note of when you're doing that and be like, oh, wow, like I'm looking for confirmation bias. This is a logical fallacy that's impeding my ability to learn. I need to, even though it's going to be uncomfortable, I should check out these alternative viewpoints and see what they say, especially if they're coming from credible sources. This isn't to say that you owe it to people to hear them out on anecdotes when your understanding of your perspective is rooted in research. And like that's also where I draw the line and set a boundary. Is I'm not going to let someone talk my ear off using their personal anecdotes and perspectives and opinions that are not grounded in any type of evidence-based research, and use those thought patterns to discredit evidence-based research, because it's beneath the quality of, like information that I have gotten. And learning how to do like look into things and do your own reading and learning too will help bring confidence with that, where like even if someone disagrees with you heavily, you can look and go, I have the ability to learn and unlearn. And I know that I know that I've done enough homework on this topic that I feel comfortable with the information that's out there. And there's little that supports this other perspective, so I'm not going to run with it. Like, not all opinions and perspectives are built the same, so we don't need to give them the same type of spotlight and understanding. And like to me, I find it like so insulting and kind of just like ridiculous to like behavioral scientists who have spent like decades researching all types of animal behavior, but especially the ones that specialize directly in horses. It's insulting to the work they do and the amount of time and effort that they've put into their education to suggest that like Billy Sue from like the show barn down the street is more educated on horse behavior without bias than they are, especially when that perspective that they're offering is not supported by any evidence-backed research. It's insulting to the people who put so much time and effort into researching that information for us and providing it. because the amount of time that they put into it is a lot. And like even for myself, the amount of time that I've put into my equine sciences education on like an hourly basis is a ton. And then I also have to do 36 hours of credit hours um, every time I need to renew my IAABC certification. So we're talking like hundreds and hundreds of hours of poring over equine sciences studies and deep diving into horse behavior in a way that a lot of people who are looking to uphold the status quo of the sport are not doing. Um, and it's okay to have enough respect and confidence in yourself to go like, I have put a lot of work and effort into this and my perspective is valid. It's not egotistical to do so. I've had people call me a narcissist for not accepting an anecdotal opinion on horse behavior, especially like stuff pertaining to like stress behaviors in horses, where they'll just say like, oh, some horses just do that, that's not a stress behavior. Like I've had people argue with me that cribbing isn't related to stress. And there's like no evidence of that. And maintaining my perspective and like setting that boundary and be like, look, your perspective, like if you have evidence to back your point, that's not just your personal opinion, bring it forward and I'm all ears. But a lot of times they don't. And if they don't, I don't have to hear that opinion and take it into account to the same degree that I would an evidence backed opinion. And I can also stand my ground with people who try to steamroll me in doing so, because again, it's insulting to the amount of effort and work that I've put into learning to give someone else the, like, basically, not the benefit of the doubt isn't the right word. Give someone else the same like level of merit with like their personal perspective. And I've gotten a lot of flack for this. Like one example I'm not going to go really far into that I'll provide is like I got like shit all over when Carl Cook got mad at me for me saying that Kalinka was showing stress behavior during an award ceremony, because she was. I didn't say, like, I said it could be pain or stress, but I called stress like emotional stress. Emotional stress is an emotional pain because it's the horse feels unsafe, so that's how I refer to it. And he brought up these studies that he was using, but he'd misinterpreted the findings of a lot of them, and then also like personal perspectives, insulted me and my education, and essentially tried to use his status as weight behind his argument. And when I held my ground and was like, no, a lot of people were like, how dare you say that to a Grand Prix rider? And I was like, I'm gonna keep saying it to a Grand Prix rider. Like, show me like even one Grand Prix rider that has the education that I have on horse behavior. And again, that's not to say I'm the smartest person in the world and that I know everything, but I've put more time into that area of education than they have, just as they've put more time into educating themselves on how to jump a meter 60 course. I probably cannot do that. If I practiced, I probably could, but I haven't put the time into learning that, so I'm not going to be as skilled in doing that. And having enough having enough faith and like just appreciation for the time that I've put into learning is like not a bad thing. And I also think too that like there's another layer of it that's rooted in misogyny, where if you are a woman and you're, especially if you're standing up to men, and you're like, no, I don't agree with your perspective, you get like steamrolled. But basically what I'm trying to say is that like someone, they are educated on equine sciences and horse behavior. In fact, it makes it more likely that they're going to have a harder time accurately reading horse behavior for what it is, because if they were to start studying it, they're going to learn that an awful lot of behaviors that they've interpreted as normal behaviors are actually stress related behaviors that are not normal. With the truth of that while staying within your role in that community is very uncomfortable. So my phone is having problems. So that's the thing is like, we'll just end the Facebook live, but this one I'll keep going. So that's the thing is like, it's most of them don't put the time into the education because they're putting time into prepping for competition, which is fine. But I don't have to give them the like the support of being like, oh yeah, because you're an upper level rider, you're as knowledgeable on this topic as I am. Like it's my special interest. And also like there's another layer of it that like people who are neurodivergent would understand is like, being like ADHD means that like when I hyperfixate on something, like I will literally spend like 8 hours straight without getting up, not even getting a drink of water, poring over horse studies in an obsessive manner and saving all of them. And I have like hundreds of studies saved on my computer right now. That's beside the point. Like it's such a special interest of mine that put um I put a lot of effort into learning and studying, and like even just the coursework that I've done. That's without even looking at the work that I've done like outside of that. Like the projects that I've had to prep for, the courses that I've taken in order to pass them. I put a lot of time into that. And it's okay to have respect and honor that the work that you've put in and not be ashamed of holding your ground in that way just because the person that you're standing up to has status. And that's something that I had to learn and practice over a lengthy period of time because, as I'm sure a lot of people know, if they've followed me for any length of time, like there's a lot of upper level riders who I've shared photos of that I have not agreed with like what they're doing. And it doesn't mean that I think they're terrible people and that they're just mean, bad, angry, horrible people. I don't think that at all. I actually hope that one day they will make needed changes. And I have faith in a lot of their capacity to do so. And like just a brief reference with the Carl Cook situation again is like when I made the post that I did, like I truly believed that he was going to receive it far better than he did. Clearly that didn't happen, but I thought that because of the way he presented himself online, I thought that it would have gone a lot differently than it did. So that was like my misinterpretation, I guess. Because ultimately you don't know people. But I still believe that like people like him are probably amongst the more likely riders to make to make different changes and modernize because they seem to be more curious and at least like making an effort in other ways. So I don't think that people who don't do things the same way as me are terrible people. But that doesn't mean I can't be critical of how their actions might impact like others. I mean, like it's the same. Like I have a lot of the same views against like punishment and certain types of behavior modification when it comes to other animals and like children too. And like I don't have kids, but like I would get into an argument with a parent about hitting kids if they were justifying that too, you know. And it doesn't matter that I don't have kids. The science is pretty solid on why we shouldn't do that. But anyways, so it's okay to stand up for yourself, and it's really annoying that like especially women, it seems that we're put in this position where when we advocate for ourselves and are basically just like, no, I don't agree with you, people view that as a personal attack. And I've found that a lot too with like the welfare discourse is when someone posts in disagreement of my post and I hold my ground and I'm basically like, no, I don't agree with you, that disagreement is oftentimes taken as like a personal attack because they have some of their self perspective and self esteem rooted in other people agreeing with them and supporting their opinion. So when I don't do that, it feels like a personal attack to them. And that's a problem that like those people need to work on because you should have enough faith in your perspectives and like your ability to change and research and do whatever that like someone else not agreeing with you isn't going to derail how you feel about yourself and make you feel attacked. So yeah, anyways, this was long-winded, and basically what I'm saying is that like most of us have grown up doing something shitty to horses, and even people who claim that they haven't, like I bet there has been an instance where they've lost their patience or done something or like used a crappy piece of equipment or something. There's been something, even if it's completely accidental, that has impacted the horse in a negative way. Like most of us have. So in changing the industry, we just need to accept the fact that like that's where a lot of us are coming from, and there's the capacity to change, but the important part of change, I think, is accountability. And every time people are justifying their mistakes, they're not viewing it as a mistake if they're trying to justify it. So that's the difference. And like for example, Charlotte Dujardin, how she responds over these next few months is going to be like very crucial in like how my perspective of her will develop, because she could use this to make really important systemic change, and speak out about the pressures of competition and how those can influence unethical training methods, and use it as an educational experience for everyone, and just talk about some of the toxicity in the competitive environment. And that would be really helpful, and it also might be healing for her, who knows. But ultimately, it's like we need to view things with nuance. People doing bad things to horses doesn't mean that they're bad in every aspect. It doesn't mean that they can't be brought to information that causes them to change. And like we need to view these shades of nuance within someone. They're not always like who they are in the worst moment. Even people who are like objectively terrible people, there's going to be some threads of good within them, even if the bad vastly outweighs the good. But with that said, like, because of the culture in the horse world, it's a little bit different than it is in other industries, I think, because it's just so normalized to be really harsh on horses and not care. Like, just go scroll through horse TikTok for 2 minutes, and the videos that are normalized on there that get tons of likes and have people laughing at them and cheering the riders on, a lot of them are horrendous. So it's just so normalized that it's like people get gaslighted into being a certain way. But anyways, I'm going to skedaddle, and I'm going to keep posting stuff mostly on my Facebook page. So for people who don't follow me on Facebook, that's where I'd recommend going if you want like Olympic updates on a regular basis. My Facebook page is Milestone Equestrian. I'm going to leave this live up for people who choose to watch it. I know it's really long. Might snatch the audio from this to turn into a podcast for people who prefer listening to things that way. But yeah, thank you for listening. And yeah, just if we want the horse world to get better, we need to maintain the perspective that people can grow and change. Because I was like a freaking shithead to horses, and I would have literally, like, me now would have looked at past me and been like, I wouldn't have like I say bullied past, I would bully myself because it's me, but like what I mean is like I would be very much in disagreement with myself, because I'm a different person now. And like even just like me from my early 20s to now in a lot of aspects outside of the horse world, different person, different timeline. Doesn't mean that some stuff that I did prior to that wasn't shitty. And like, I mean, again, everyone makes mistakes, but different person. I've had a lot of growth and I've made changes, and making previous bad decisions with horses and other things doesn't mean that I have to continue doing that or that I have to double down. And it's also not hypocritical to change your perspective as you learn more. That is called growth. Okay, thank you everybody, and have a great day.